We are about to get started. Welcome everybody to the June event or the June webinar from Direct HR. The topic of today is going to be the AI industry in China. I am very happy to have here today also our partner 𝘊𝘁𝘃𝗀𝗪𝗀𝗀 is based in Shanghai. He and his company AGP have actually been a very, very long-term trusted partner from Direct HR. So I'm really happy that he's joining us today, and he really is an expert in his field. He will give you some insights which I think will be very interesting. If this is the first time, let me maybe explain a little bit. We are going to do this the standard way. Our presentation is going to be in total a rough 60 minutes. I would like to invite you to note down any questions that you have and ask them at the end of the presentation so that we don't forget. Also, please know that we are recording this meeting. If you don't want to be on record or recorded, please, number one, turn off your camera. And number two, you can change your name. So if you go on your profile, you can rename yourself. So right now I see a lot of people have the actual name. If you don't want your name to show, then you can change it to be an initial or just a shorting. We are going to upload this video on my YouTube channel, and we are going to not upload this part where we're about now. And now this is where we start. So welcome everybody. Let me share my screen. Let me share my screen, and please tell me if you can see something. Can you see something?
Yes.
Yep. Yes.
Yes. Okay. Very
Yes.
good. So I will be talking about China's AI landscape. Before we start, maybe just a rough introduction also about myself. Most of you know me. My name is Miriam Wickertsheim. I'm originally from Germany. This is why my accent is so strong. I have been in China a very, very long time. We need to actually update this. Actually, this year, October, is going to be 18 years in China. And I'm working for the company Direct HR. Direct HR is one of the largest German-speaking recruiting companies, headhunting companies here in China. We focus predominantly on the China market, and since about 2 years also on Thailand and Vietnam. So I personally spent about 1 or 2 months a year in Thailand and Vietnam to expand our projects over there as well. If your organization has any recruiting need, we would be a good fit for positions which start at, I would say, head of department level. That means we start at a level of 500,000 RMB per annual salary candidate, and then we go up. So we start at head of department, then we go to China GM, China MD, or Asia Pacific responsibility. If that is what you need, you are welcome to reach out to me via the usual channels. And let's get to the topic without much further ado. Talking about today's event, I would like to have four main topics. First of all, I would like to just give a general overview about the AI ecosystem. Who are the key players? What are their names, and what are they doing, and what is important for China? So how is the market growing? What is the objective of the government? Where is the money coming from? And also, how does the strategies between the two AI powers, because even though it hurts me a little bit as a German, there are really only two, which is China and the US, in my humble opinion. How are they similar? How are they different? And in the end, because you know I'm a headhunter, speaking a little bit about AI talent and AI talent shortage, which is something that China is experiencing as much as any other country. All right, let's get started with the ecosystem. And what's really important to know is that the ecosystem in China has been growing quite impressively and also quite quickly. And this growth is further accelerating. So at the moment, or actually in the first half of 2024, we had more than 237,000 new AI companies, which then in total make more than 1,670,000 AI companies. So that means it's a massive, massive AI industry landscape. And of course, keeping in mind, this is the entire industry, so it's quite a broad field. What is important to, I think, to realize, however, and to acknowledge is that explosive growth also comes with some challenges. And very specifically, the challenge is that a lot of these companies don't make it. So we have somewhere around 80,000, probably more, startups or failed startups within the last 600 days. However, one comment I would like to make about this. Number one, this is not uncommon. So there's a common statistic that says 9 out of 10 startups don't make it. So the survival rate for startups in general, globally, across all industries, is in general not very high. So this statistic, of course, you have to look a little bit more granular, but what you can keep in mind is that tech startups are more likely to fail than non-tech startups, for example, a more traditional company. So that is number one to put in perspective. And number two, this failed startups and also the subsequent close of these companies cannot be compared to, for example, what is going on in the automotive industry. At the moment in the automotive industry, we have an incredible amount of consolidation happening. A lot of companies are struggling and failing. This is a different scenario to what is going on in the AI industry. Now, let's look at the key players. And here you can see a quick overview. And I would like to start at the top. So what you see, the upper 5 companies we have, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, SenseTime, and Huawei, are very, very famous. I would say that everybody, that you all know at least 4 of them. And they dominate and continue to dominate China's AI sector. They're also investing actually very heavily in R&D. They are also on board with some of the other companies you see listed below. Listed below, sorry. For example, Alibaba, also very interesting, is focusing on integrating AI into consumer devices and platforms globally by now. There is one company which maybe not everybody knows, and that is SenseTime. So SenseTime is a company that is also a big player in the industry, but not always so well known outside of the industry. So what they do is computer vision. What does computer vision mean? It means like face and object recognition, and it goes into autonomous driving. They also do NLP, decision making, Gen AI, and so on. And they work in different industry applications. So you have healthcare, you have automotive, you have finance, you have smart cities, different industry applications. And they are a company to watch. So if that is the first time you heard about them today, then keep your eyes and ears open. I think you will meet this name many more times. And below it, you have what we call the 6 tigers, and later on also the 4 dragons. So what China likes to do is China likes to give very beautiful names. And I'm sure you know this from various government policies, which sound always like they have historical value. So what we have are the 6 tigers, and the 6 tigers below, DeepSeek, Minimax, Stepfund, Zhipu AI, Bytron AI, and Moonshot AI, they actually take a lot of their employees also from the companies above, for example, Huawei, but also from international companies like Google. Let's look a little bit at these companies. DeepSeek, I'm skipping DeepSeek because I think you all know DeepSeek. Everybody knows DeepSeek out of Hangzhou. So let's start with Minimax. Let's start with Minimax. Minimax is a consumer-facing AI app. And so what they do is, for example, they have 𝘍𝘅𝘊𝘁, and 𝘍𝘅𝘊𝘁 is a chatbot quite often used. So they have somewhere 28, 30 million users per day. And what people can do is they can create an avatar, which can be a fantasy figure or a celebrity and so on, to chat. And this company, Minimax, actually was removed from the App Store in the United States due to technical difficulties. I'm just going to leave that there as a statement. Then another company which also belongs to the Six Tigers, it's called 𝘊𝘁𝘀. So 𝘊𝘁𝘀 has been founded by a former Microsoft VP, and they focus more on AGI and foundational models. So they are actually very high ranked in China. Another company next is 𝘊𝘯𝘀. So 𝘊𝘯𝘀 comes out of Tsinghua University. I believe since you're all based in China, everybody knows Tsinghua University in Beijing. Tsinghua University is investing heavily into research, and they have a lot of connections to the AI company. So there's a lot of personnel, there's a lot of information, a lot of research that goes back and forth. So Tsinghua is very deeply involved in the AI sphere. So 𝘊𝘯𝘀 also comes out of Tsinghua. They work on large language models, video gen tools, and they are actually also on the US export restricted blacklist. And the reason is that there have been some allegations that 𝘊𝘯𝘀 may be related to the Chinese military. And of course, that would have been a concern or would be a concern for America. Next one is Bytron. Bytron Intelligence is an open source healthcare model, and they have various models. Next one is Moonshot. Moonshot AI also comes from Tsinghua, and they've created something called 𝘊𝘁𝘁𝑐hat. So 𝘊𝘁𝘁𝑐hat is something like a long text chat bot, and it's usually used for larger information. So a lot of students use it, or a lot of teachers use it. So that's really where it's famous. And then below it, you have what's called specialized AI companies. So specialized AI companies are also in the greater ecosystem. So you have a company called Cambrion to the very left. Cambrion Technologies is partly state-owned, and at the same time it's publicly listed. And what they do is they make chips. So they make AI chips, which is very, very important to the key strategy and policy of China to be independent or have semiconductor independence. So this is a very important company. Another big player is iFlyTech. iFlyTech, what they do is they do voice recognition. So voice recognition for consumer applications, but also for business applications. And this company, what's interesting, it's actually not a new company. So iFlyTech has been founded somewhere in the 90s. So a comparatively long time ago, but somewhere along the line they pivoted. And in 2018, when China really started to invest more heavily into the AI, they have been selected as an AI champion. So also they're getting a lot of funding and support from the government. Then we have three companies, or four companies actually. So you have 𝘍𝑚𝑒𝑛𝑔𝑣, you have CloudWalk, you have SenseTime, which is above, and you have E2. And these four companies together also have a beautiful name. And so they're called the Four Dragons, or Four Little Dragons. And they focus on facial recognition. So they do like smart cities and AI healthcare tools, for example. And then last but not least, you have 𝘊𝑖ntelligence. So 𝘊𝑖ntelligence, the name comes from the word infinity and intelligence. And so they made 𝘊𝑖ntelligence out of it. And what they're doing is they're building advanced computing systems to train AI. And they're especially training AI to be more efficient amid the global chip shortage that they're facing. Let's look a little bit at the market growth and key trends. So what we can see here is that in 2023, the market was already significant with 500 billion. And then in 2035, it has grown further. And there are some key trends. So for example, one key trend for the Chinese government is that they really want to boost self-reliance and technology in response to US export restrictions. So that is very important. So what we see now playing out in several years, US puts some restrictions, and then China kind of adapts and tries to gain independence in these particular areas.
Hi, Miriam.
Yeah.
Yeah, there seems the presentation seems not to be coming through.
Okay, what can you see?
Right now, it's a blank screen. It's like if it was not being shared. I don't know if the rest of the guests on their end experience the same, but maybe I can Let me see.
Can somebody else tell me? Can you see the presentation or not?
I see it
we can
now.
see the presentation. We can see the
Also,
presentation, no problem.
You can see it. Okay.
Yeah, I can see the presentation as well. Now at market growth and key trends.
Okay, perfect. This is
thank you,
Viviana.
guys.
Juanjo, then
Perfect.
I don't know what it is, no problem, but thanks
No,
for
I
pointing
see
it
it
out,
now.
guys.
Thank you.
If at some point it doesn't work, just let me know. I'm only looking at the presentation, so then I need verbal information. So please let me know if that happens. Okay, but great that everybody's still with me. I was just talking a little bit about market growth and industry trends. So the building self-sufficiency, super important for China. And this goes in different areas. And there are actually also some significant improvements that's already been made. So for example, one improvement is a chip, like an AI chip for Huawei. And what they did is they increased their production yield from 20% to 40%. And that's quite significant. They are also dating their processors to just be much more efficient than previous models. And we really see that several companies are investing very heavily in chip development. I think that is really that's really important and interesting. And we also see that open source AI is another strategy. So you have companies like DeepSeek, Alibaba, Baidu, Tencent, and so on, and they have released advanced models that are free to download, free to modify, and free to integrate. And this is a different strategy that, for example, ChatGPT is using. If I'm not mistaken, ChatGPT is still working on becoming profitable. Or probably that may be a longer way to go. So from what I understand is that the ChatGPT, for example, we are not all too happy that all of this is open source model, but it is really something that is encouraging and just pushing the growth here in China. We also see that Chinese firms are getting better at optimizing their AI chips for their AI for older generation chips. So for example, also DeepSeek has developed its LLM that can run on older hardware or less advanced hardware. And all of this just plays into the self-sufficiency that China is trying to build to protect itself from some of the sanctions or restrictions that the US has or may in the future initiate. Another point to look at is the growth. And what is really standing out is that this AI growth in China is heavily supported by the government. That means the government is putting some serious thinking in it and some really serious investing in it. So there are different initiatives. So you have the AI Plus initiative, for example, and that is doing funding for R&D. It's having specialized subsidies. It is has been just mentioned recently in Q2. We had the annual 2 sessions, and here also AI was a major topic. So it's a really clear message, I think. If you look at the overall support and how the government is communicating, it's very clear China really wants to transform itself into a leading AI powerhouse economy. And I think they're quite on the way to reach that. So their goal really is to roll out large-scale AI models across various sectors. So you have manufacturing to mobility. It's supposed to cover the economy as well as the society itself. So there is really a push to put smart tech into everything you can imagine. So AI-enabled cars, AI-enabled phones, AI-enabled robots and factories and equipment. So there's a lot going on and a lot of government support and push. Well, now my screen is frozen. That is also interesting. Wait. Okay, can you see trend number 3?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. At least it works on your side. I'm so happy. Great. So trend number 3 is how is the government supporting? So I already said this is very high up on the agenda, and the government has ambitious targets. And of course, there are different institutions, if you will, who invest in the AI sector. And that, that is normal. But what's interesting is they're at the moment all focusing on similar industries. So you have information and communications technology, energy, AI, life science, manufacturing, and so on. So those are the common areas of investment. What you will find is that also according to a Goldman Sachs report from a short while ago, is that Chinese firms may boost their capital spending by up to 38% this year, 2025. And their main priority at the moment seems to be to build up infrastructure, semiconductors, cloud services, and telecommunication services. And on top of that, so in the last 10 years, maybe 12 years ago, the government put an additional 912 billion US into various strategic industries. And out of that, 25% already back then, 10 to 12 years ago, went into the AI-related companies. So that's actually also a significant amount. From the early 2000s to 2023, there were more than 4,000 AI-related companies in China which received additional investment, and about 3/4 of those approximately received funding from public VC, so venture capitalist funds or sources. And why is that important? That is important because it has signaling power. Because China being China, sometimes not all market information is clearly or easily available, especially for private companies. So it can be a little bit opaque. And so the signaling means that if some government VCs invest in a certain company, it signals to the private VCs that this company is either doing a good job or will be supported or is in line with current or future AI government regulations. So often we see that the government VCs go first, and the private VCs, they kind of follow. So that's what I mean with signaling. What China is additionally, it's not on the slide, but what China is also trying to do, it's working so they're trying to spread the investments throughout the country geographically. At the moment, we still have the hubs without a doubt around Shanghai, South China, Hangzhou area, and so on. So there are some clear hubs, but the government is trying to spread it out a little bit more evenly to also spread out the growth more evenly. Great. That brings us to the next point. The big question is, how is China and the US, how are they doing it differently? So first of all, strategic focus in China, it's very top down. So the government has decided this is a priority. They are putting it into their national plans. They're focusing on application into verticals. You have different plans, and the focus really is on self-sufficiency and national security. In America, it's a little bit different. So in America, it is more focusing on strengthen the leadership in semiconductor science and technology innovation. And it's more of a combination of direct subsidies, tax incentives, and long-term R&D. And it's more focused on public-private partnerships. Because this brings us to the funding. The funding in China tends to come from the government. Government, central and local government venture funds inject a huge amount into strategic industries. And this is where most of the funding or a lot of the funding is coming from. And this is quite different to what's going on in America. So in America, we really see that the private sector dominates. So in America, you have most of the funding coming from the private industries, and then the government stepping in specific areas where they say this is a really important area, that's a really important area, and then they support that as well. Another difference is the data access and the regulatory approach. In China, as many things are quite centralized, so the government is setting up national regulations and then they're rolling it out. And it is quite often a broad approach, like various laws we all know in China, which are very encompassing many different things, and then also are meant to also support national security in a beneficial way. So this protection and self-sufficiency thought, we can really see it trickling through all the different approaches. In America, again, it's different. So in America, it's that the state level privacy laws are coming up in addition to federal laws. It's a little bit of a patchwork. And so companies would be well advised in America, at least, to really make sure what's going on in their specific location. There are also a few regulations which are very specific to just one industry, for example. And then this gets us to the important part. And I always say people make your company, and I really believe that. And this is the AI talent shortage, and I'm already calling it talent shortage because this is what it is. So let me put it like this. China has greatly expanded its AI talent pool over the last several years to meet the demand of a growing need, of a growing AI industry, right? So China has also succeeded to produce a very sizable portion of the global, so the worldwide talent itself. So to give you a reference, from 2019, China produced, or educated maybe is a more appropriate word, 29% of all AI research talent. And then in 2022, that reached 47%. So quite a big jump. And more Chinese talent is working home. But at the same time, this is not quite enough to cover the needs. So in general, what we see specifically with talent that comes in the AI field is that you could say they're a little bit homebodies. So they like to work in that country where they are. So there's a slightly above average compared to other industries or functions likelihood that they want to work in that city or country where they are, where in their job they could work somewhere else. So just technically it's possible, and also from the opportunities it's possible, but they're actually not very mobile. So globally, only 42% of really top tier AI talent is willing to work in a different country, which is not their home country. And this trend even continues downward. And so that is one of the reasons, I think, why China has actually opened more than 500 universities in the last couple of years to offer AI bachelor programs, or also AI PhD programs. But even for the PhD program, so the overall feedback from the market is that even the PhD graduates in the AI field, of course, they're very educated, but there's still somewhat of a mismatch that they may not always be sufficient for really cutting edge research. And that is something, of course, that we also hear from other industries. It's just a mismatch between what universities educate for and what companies really want. But that is also something that's happening in China. And this is just increasing the shortage. So, and this is why we started with shortage. Already 5 years ago, in 2020, the Chinese Ministry of Human Resources said that, oh, we are lacking 5 million AI professionals. We would need more. And only one qualified person for every 10 AI jobs. So that is a serious gap. And now the estimation is that in 5 years, so by 2030, the demand is going to increase. And despite the work that China has been doing, so despite the additional 500 universities, despite all the additional students they're funneling in AI-related research fields, there's still going to be a shortage of around 4 million employees, qualified employees. So that is something to really keep in mind, and I think that is one of the main bottlenecks that China is going to face. However, and this as a parting sentence, China is still doing very well comparatively. So US is also facing a lot of shortages when it comes to qualified AI professionals, similar to China. And those two already really take the cake. So really qualified AI professionals in other countries are even harder to find. So from an HR perspective, yes, it's a problem. It's also a significant problem, but it's not worse than any other country has it, because this is comparatively new industry, comparatively new technology, and there just are not 10, 20 years of pipeline that has been built. Guys, I hope you found this interesting. Just as a short summary, it's really good to for companies to understand what is happening, to understand the government support, to understand the speed and the magnitude, and to try and leverage Chinese growing domestic capabilities through partnerships. If you can, also with local academic institutions and of course research hubs. That's something that I personally see also happening more and more. Talent strategy is very important. There is not enough talent. There is not going to be enough talent in the immediate future in the AI sector. So to cultivate your talent and to make sure they stay, treat them well, and maybe getting them being more competitive and getting them to move is something that could be a good strategy. I personally, as a recruiter since April, get a lot of messages from Chinese nationals living in America wanting to come back to China because they feel less comfortable over there. So I think it is possible that China will see an additional inflow of high qualified employees coming back here. And then also the long-term vision, like many things in China, whether it be the Made in China 2025, the China Standards 2035, be it the financial systems that China is setting up, there's a long-term plan and there's a long-term vision behind it. So I would assume that even though we are still comparatively at the beginning of this journey in this particular industry, that China is really going to push forward here. And I think that already maybe next year, maybe in 1 or 2 years, if we do the same event again, there'll be new names and new companies, and there will be a new evaluation compared to the United States. Guys, thank you so much. I hope this was interesting for you. If you like to hear more about it, let me know. We are also going to send the presentation slides out to you either tomorrow or on Friday, so then you have it. All right, here are my QR codes. If you want to connect, if you're not already connected, I'm going to leave it on for another 5 seconds. Thank you so much. And with this, I would like to already hand over to Eric for his part of the presentation.
Miriam, thank you. Let me share my screen. Okay, Miriam, is that coming through for you?
Yes.
Great. Well, it's a pleasure to be part of this conversation. So thank you for inviting me, Miriam. The topic that I'm going to go into today is deploying Gen AI in China, focusing more specifically on Gen AI. I think there's been other types of machine learning that have been deployed more broadly in manufacturing, for example, but we'll focus more on this technology because it has some unique challenges because of the way that the tech stack is based on large language models. I'm going to cover it from a few angles, which I'll get into, but the underlying challenge that we've seen working with multinational companies here in China is that they, I think by now, generally have identified use cases. So that problem has been addressed largely for many companies. In many cases, they've piloted those use cases. And then in many cases, those pilots have proven value, but not been able to scale because of a range of different compliance, governance, and technical challenges. So I'll be going into some of those topics today and looking forward also to your questions at the end of the presentation. Very quickly into myself. So my name is Direct 𝘊𝘶𝘶. I am the founding partner of Asia Growth Partners. Been in China for about 14 years now. Our company focuses on 3 areas. Number one is understanding change. So here we say anticipating disruption. What that really means is understanding what are the different levers, especially technical levers that are changing, but also kind of economic structural levers. So if we look at AI, it's not just about the technology. It's also, for example, about the geopolitics and how that impacts technology decisions. And then, how do those impact the business? So that's either trying to grow new business. In China, a lot of businesses are being disrupted to some extent because of overcapacity issues. And and other challenges, and then also transforming the business, which looks more at internal operations. And Gen AI is a fantastic technology on both sides of this, especially on transforming operations. That seems to be a bit easier because you don't have to have the challenge of a public-facing AI and the compliance issues that come along with that, at least as a first step. So that's where we're coming from. I will leave it there for the self-introduction. The first topic I wanted to touch on is AI as a long-tail technology, and why is that important for the context of AI for China? Then I'm going to go into the limits of global AI. Of course, that's the preference from headquarters for good reasons, but often it doesn't work for the Chinese operations. And finally, balancing local versus global development and the trade-offs involved there. So Gen AI is very much a long-tail technology for the enterprise. And what that means is it's used by potentially everybody in the organization, from the board down to frontline salespeople, right? Anybody who is working with information, who is managing processes, could potentially use Gen AI. And this makes it more difficult than, for example, SAP, which is kind of a very large market to it itself, but is deployed in kind of a standardized way and used by everyone across the organization in quite a similar way, because Gen AI can be used by little pockets of teams that develop solutions quite cheaply, right? Maybe for $10,000 or $20,000, a team develops a solution that solves their particular problem. And the way that they address that might be quite different from a different team in a different BU or in a different region. And so because of that, it's often very much a bottom-up technology, and this creates certain localization requirements. It's growing very quickly right now. According to our analysis, it's about 9% of IT spend, of enterprise software spend, and growing to about 32% by 2030. Is the capability and why Gen AI has this very rapid growth rate is to look at the different paths of development. So Gen AI, to some extent, has been around since for 10 plus years, maybe 15 years, in terms of image classification. You can see here that took, really this timeline started actually earlier. That took maybe 10 years. Then we started to have reading comprehension and visual reading, reasoning. That took 5-6 years. That was really the first kind of breakthrough where some people outside of the tech business started paying attention to this. And then we get into English language understanding, multitask, and that's where we're getting into like the first OpenAI product that people are using more generally. And you can see that the path to human competence is moving quite quickly. Things like English language. These are what I would consider to be the entry-level skill sets, right? So we have these competencies coming on board, and now we can say, okay, somebody who has a high school degree, they're able to do these things well. Now AI is able to do these things also well. So we can start to automate some of these entry-level competencies. For example, translating a document, right? Humans can read, now AI can read. They don't provide all the capabilities of a professional translator, but they can, we can outsource a lot of work that otherwise we might have had to ask somebody to do. Now, more recently, just in the past few years, we've started having new competencies develop extremely quickly. Comprehension level mathematics coming from a very low performance back in 2021, now exceeding human performance as of 2024. PhD level science, so meaning the ability to analyze scientific results, to make sense of them. Multimodal reasoning, so the ability to do strategy, to understand complex logic and the interrelationships between moving parts, for example, in a corporate structure. And we see now in some of the kind of the capabilities that OpenAI and other players are bringing to the market, that they're bringing things that are closer to our skill sets, right? The skill sets of the people in this group. And we have to remember that everything that is kind of hitting the market is 6 months or so behind the bleeding edge, right? Because there's always this gap, between where the technology is and the tools that are actually provided to the market. So this is just to say the technology is moving very fast. As corporates, that creates a challenge of making decisions around adopting this technology, especially when it's a bottom-up technology where we can't just from the top down make a bet and say we're going to be investing in this thing, put $10 million behind it, and we have our timeline, we have our roadmap for the next 5 years. This is really a lot of teams in the organization that need to be able to make sense of, I'm in R&D. How do I use science-based tools from AI to improve my performance of my function, right? So we need a lot of support from the organization there. When we think about the usage areas, I won't go in detail into this, but we can think about certain clusters of uses. So content creation, Q&A and discovery of complex data sets, converting unstructured data into structured data so it can be processed, user-driven programming, analyzing and simplifying complex information for presentation, classifying information or content, whether it's text, images, video, etc. So we have a lot of different. And if we think in terms of different functional areas in the business, we can also find a lot of different use case clusters. Just to illustrate the bottom-up aspect of this, things like real-time agent environments. So you have a sales agent, they're going into a meeting. Sales agents don't always have time to prepare, so they're in their car, they open up their phone and they say, what's the latest thing? What should I talk to about this customer? What's on the agenda? And an AI can give them an agenda and say, talk to them about these changes in the market, about these new press releases that they've announced, etc. So for every function, whether we're looking at customer service, sales, supply chain, there is really a very wide range, and we're really talking about hundreds of different use cases that people in the organization could be using. So a lot of micro use cases and of agent-driven use cases that support a specific team to accomplish a specific process or activity well. I won't go into these in detail. Emphasis is just on long-tail technology. This is one example also of a more complex AI solution that integrates Gen AI with other types of processing, for example, physics modeling to enable computational material science for R&D, right? And so there's also areas where you have other types of AI or kind of mathematics that are applied, for example, understanding how molecules interact with each other. And we've had that to some extent for a while. Of course, that it has its own development trajectory and is also, increasing in competence right now. But Gen AI is also kind of a magnifier or an accelerator for these solutions because it enables them to leverage data that otherwise was really, I talked earlier about unstructured data. So it allows us to convert unstructured data about experiments and so forth into structured data that can then be used to support these types of experiments. Okay, so we have a very complex ecosystem of AI solutions. Now, why does that present challenges for deployment in China? If we think about the Gen AI tech stack, there's basically these 4 layers. There's the infrastructure. I won't go into that very much. It's basically the data centers. Those have to be localized in many cases because of latency issues. We want the data to be close to the data center to reduce cost because of compliance issues. I just heard, actually, this is kind of interesting to me, that Chinese companies are now putting their data onto hard drives and taking that across the border on a plane to Malaysia to process the data there because they can't get the chips in China, and they can't send it over the cloud because it would, there's compliance issues with sending Chinese data over, so they're just putting it on hard drives and flying it, right? So there's some, kind of some workarounds, but generally the infrastructure has to be localized. So I'll focus on data, the LLMs, and the applications, and the localization considerations here. So first of all, data. A lot of data is global. So if we think about data, text, images, audio, but also things like genomics, code, chemical structures, a lot of this is global, it's public source, and it's more or less a commodity, meaning all the LLMs have equal access to it. the data that corporates have is very high value because it's unique, right? It's smaller, but it's unique. And so this is really the important consideration for corporates, is how to make, how to create value from your data. The challenge here is that corporate data is local, right? It's stored on a database in China. There's regulations that restrict data transfer overseas. There's also practical considerations, right? Often you don't want to move your factory data, all over the world. So data is local. Then if we think of LLMs, LLMs also tend to be America for global, China for China, right? Now, Chinese LLMs are competing outside of China, in some cases successfully, and some American LLMs like OpenAI through Microsoft Azure are also available in China. But it looks more and more that this is going to be a bifurcated ecosystem. Now, the good thing here is that China has a lot of very high competence LLMs, and many models are designed, many solutions are designed to be multimodal, right? So you can, in America, you can use an American LLM, and to China, you can make some customizations, then you use a Chinese LLM. So there's a bit of additional cost there, but often that's going to be the requirement, right? That you're designing to use a certain set of LLMs outside of China and another set within China. And then if we think about the applications, because for many companies, you don't want to be building your own solutions on an LLM. You want to be just buying a product off the market that's going to be the cheapest, most effective use of your resources. Then often the applications will be quite heavily localized, both because they're tailored to the local user where their market is, and Chinese users have different requirements from American users. So nonetheless, it's necessary to customize and focus on that primary user base, but also because they're storing their data on infrastructure, and often it doesn't make sense for them to set up infrastructure around the world, and so you're going to have challenges, for example, using a lot of American applications in China, because the application will be storing the data in America, and the Chinese regulators won't accept you moving your data to the US to process and then back to China, and vice versa. So a lot of the applications are necessarily local because of these cross-border data transfer issues. Even the large ones, so Salesforce, for example, I was talking with a client last week about this. They're rolling Salesforce AI out. It's unclear right now what Salesforce for the AI suite will be available in China, right? So to some extent, it's been announced that it'll be available, but what functionality is available, that's uncertain. For Microsoft, formally, they're not supporting China, but of course you can use Microsoft Copilot in China. So there's this kind of gray zone where you can use it, but it's not formally supported. And from a corporate compliance or just a planning perspective, that's a challenge. Some of the bigger tools like Snowflake, they have a data center in Beijing, but that data center doesn't support their AI applications. It only supports kind of some of their other database functionality. So from a lot of the corporates, even the larger ones, they either don't support in China or they provide limited support, right? And that requires then using the local ecosystem of application providers. And then the last consideration here is just the business consideration, right? Everybody's running similar processes, right? China has the order to delivery process, same process runs in the US, but these actually look different, right? They look different because the cost of labor is different, because working cultures and processes are different, customer requirements are different, supplier behaviors are different, et cetera. Because of that, they have different pain points. There's different business case calculations, different user expectations for interfaces, different process flows. And so there's also this business requirement for localizing. So global is the headquarter preference, but it often doesn't meet Chinese requirements, either because of regulatory barriers or because of differing business requirements. So how do we address this? The way that we think about this is first to look at it from a regulatory perspective. And usually I'm looking at this from the perspective of the China team trying to communicate to the headquarters team and say, we need to be doing more in China, or at least we need to have a framework for how do we decide what we do in China and what we do at headquarters? Because if we're simply going to be waiting for headquarters to do a global for global solution that works for China, we're going to be waiting for for years, while our Chinese competition moves ahead because they are absolutely investing in AI and moving rapidly ahead of us in this area. And so usually that's kind of the background that I'm approaching this from. The key thing then in this conversation is to look at regulatory frameworks and compliance around that. Those should be the kind of the foundation of the decision, right? And so within China, we have the cybersecurity law, data security law, personal information protection laws. These have been announced for a number of years now. What we're seeing now is more detailed regulations being put out, for example, algorithm management, synthesis of internet-based information services, regulations helping to clear up some of the gray area around cross-border data flow. So we're seeing now the more operational regulations being introduced to support these laws. The gist is that for data localization, if you're moving anything that's personal identifiable information across borders, you need to apply for consent. You need to prove that it's necessary. I think what I've heard is that a lot of companies are getting approval for consent. So it's not that they're going to just say no to each company, but this creates a certain administrative challenge. It creates a backlog. And of course, in some cases, if you're doing e-commerce or something and you have quite a large data set, they may very well say no. For data providers in China, there's some limitations in terms of service terms for moving data that they provide to you overseas, right? So if you're relying on data provided by a service provider in China, there might be some limitations on moving that data overseas. For AI certification, if it's a AI that's public facing, meaning it's not just used by internal employees, but your customers are using it, then it's subject to security reviews. For compliance requirements, the AIGC, so AI generated content, has to adhere to local regulatory expectations. And so if you're relying on, for example, an American-based content generator, this is probably not going to work well for the Chinese market. And then there's availability challenges. Right now, we're still, I'd say, in the early stages of the US and China negotiating what their relationship looks like in regards to AI. There's still a lot of gray area and uncertainty. But the one thing that seems certain is that there's a lot of risk here for corporates, right? And so there's, we don't know who the US president will be in 3 years. What we do know is that the US president has the ability basically at any moment to severely restrict Chinese access to American technology. For example, one of the things that has been on the table apparently for President Trump in the recent negotiations is restricting Chinese access to GitHub, right? And GitHub is basically the repository for open source code that's really critical to a lot of AI development. And if they restrict that, Chinese developers will struggle to use that American code base and a lot of people are relying on today. So that's a negotiation chip. Hopefully they don't use that, but it's on the table. There's a lot of other things also on the Chinese side that that could change. I think right now China seems to want to have a more stable relationship, but in any case, we can anticipate that there will be a lot of risk around the availability of solutions across borders. So for me, this is the starting point. If we think about different scenarios and how they would be impacted here, we have scenarios where customer data is stored in China. So you have, for example, data from your customers, data from your suppliers, et cetera. So moving that data outside of China will require additional efforts to stay compliant. We have use cases where there's public-facing information. This may be required to be located in China. Generally, it would be required to be stored in China, so you wouldn't be able to kind of process those customer requests, for example, in the US, and then display that information in China. And if you're using external data providers, 𝘊𝘅𝗪𝗧, Qixing, then also you would not be able to move their data across the border often, so you'd have to store that in China. So that gives us two options, right? We either do an in-China deployment or we do a global deployment. The pros and the cons I think are pretty transparent here. So for in China, the benefits is that it's easier to be in compliance. If you're building a solution that's primarily used in China, it's easier to be in compliance with Chinese regulations. If you build it, you store your data in China. Cons there, of course, is that you have to do more filings with the authority. You're going to have, to some extent, limited integrations, or you'll have to at least invest in those integrations and figure out how to properly integrate with other regions. And you might be duplicating resources. And this is really going to be the critical factor for headquarters is, China's 20% of my revenue. I've got 80% of global revenue that's being served by a solution built in the US. Does it make sense to also build that solution in China, given that China's 20% of my revenue? And if so, how do I do that in the most efficient way? Ideally by leveraging learnings from abroad and applying them in China. The global deployment option has also pros, right? If you deploy globally, no need to file with Chinese authorities. Of course, then you can't be publicly facing. There's compliance issues with moving data. It's easier to integrate globally and have consistency across operations, and you can leverage that investment across the world. So if you're able to deploy globally, there's often a preference for that. The challenge, of course, is that often that's not possible, right? From a compliance perspective, you're not going to get consent from customers to move their data across borders. You're in risk of contractual violations with customers and service providers, et cetera. So how do we think through this? And I think the critical thing is to have a logical conversation with counterparts between China and headquarters and come up with a framework to decide when are we going to act in, develop and deploy in China? When are we going to develop and deploy at headquarters? The way that we think through this is basically that the first set of decision criteria should be compliance risks and IT architecture, which is largely driven by compliance, right? So first we want to understand what is actually possible. What are the options on the table, given our compliance requirements and the related IT architecture? IT architecture, in addition to compliance, also includes some other things such as latency, right? So if we want to have an application responds in near term, real time to customers or users, that probably needs to be in China. We can't be moving that across the firewall and expecting a good customer experience. The secondary criteria are related to efficiency. So that's about coordination. Does the DevOps share the same language and location as users? So if we're developing solutions for the factory, we want the DevOps team to be able to visit the factory, talk to the users, really understand the situation. Speed to impact, how long can we develop? We all know that China speed is a real thing. China cost is also a real thing. So if we're developing it for the Chinese market, generally it's going to make sense to develop in the Chinese market because it will be faster and cheaper than sending requirements to headquarters and expecting them to build the solution. And then lastly, where's the talent pool? So where do we have the internal talent? Where do we have the vendor ecosystem? So those are very important considerations. I consider them to be secondary because the governance determines what's actually possible. One other way to think about this is if we have on the left side locally led projects and on the right side headquarters led projects, we can think about kind of a framework of different criteria: vendor cost, infrastructure cost, global regulatory compliance, global user fit, local user fit, et cetera. The locally led projects tend to be preferred by business stakeholders. So they, if you have a local business team that has a certain set of pain points, often you're going to be better able to actually address their pain points if you develop that solution in China because you're closer to them. You're working with the local ecosystem, storing the data in China. So you're going to have a much simpler deployment scenario. If you deploy globally, you're often going to be better able to meet global compliance, both regulatory compliance from EU, US, and also internal compliance and standardization goals. So, often the business stakeholders will prefer locally led. The IT stakeholders from HQ will prefer global, hence the negotiation and the need for a solution here. One way that, this is my last slide here. So one way that we kind of think through this is you want to have a decision tree. This is a very simplified approach here, where you think, okay, first we have a new use case. How do we start to think through where this should be developed and deployed? So first, is it a core system or non-core, right? So if it's a non-core system, meaning it's something that's used by a specific team, it's not, it's not ERP, it's not one of your kind of global financial databases, then it's going to go on one track, right? The non-core track. If it's a core system, separate track. If it's a core system, it's very hard for this to be a Chinese-led solution. It's almost inevitably going to be headquarters-led or China plus headquarters co-led. If it's non-core, then we start to consider regulatory compliance, speed, cost, etc. Key question here, is China the primary user group, or is it a global rollout? If China is the primary user group, we're going to prioritize Chinese regulatory compliance. We'll leverage China's speed. It makes sense to do it in China because we don't need to think about global user needs. We can focus on the local user needs, etc. And we have a Chinese-led solution that prioritizes business goals, local compliance, and low cost structure. If it's a global non-core solution where China is one of many user groups, then we might be thinking more about EU, US regulatory compliance. We might be thinking about the cost structure of how do we develop one solution that can meet all global requirements. User needs are going to be diversified across the world, and so we're going to prioritize global scalability and customize when feasible for China. And then on the core solution, we're going to be primarily looking here at regulatory compliance and internal compliance, system integration. So these more IT-driven requirements. Generally, this will be HQ-led. In some cases, especially if let's say you're a chemical company and China is 40% of your global production, then something like a China plus HQ co-led solution might make sense, where you're really trying to balance the business goals of your most important, let's say, supply chain or end customer group country, which may very well be China, with global compliance requirements. And then you're splitting development capability, development team responsibilities based on capability, capacity, access to data, etc. That gets a bit more complex, but for a lot of the companies that we're working with who are in chemicals and in pharma, for example, China is such an important market that is actually one important approach to developing solutions. I'm at my time here, so I will cut off. Last slide is just my email address, eric.𝘊𝘀𝑎@Asia Growth Partners. I think Miriam will be sharing this slide deck after our talk today. So let me stop sharing, and Miriam will make sure that you have the deck and my details. And Miriam, back over to you.
Okay, perfect, Eric. Thank you so much, and I really appreciate it. That was very interesting. I especially liked what you called simple decision tree. I think that's a very good first start for many companies, because I feel a lot of companies sometimes they don't know where to start. So I think that's good to use consultancies like yours, but also internally for their thinking process to just get a head start. Great, everybody. This was the webinar for today. We will be sending to the email that you registered with both of our presentation slides. If you have any HR questions, you're always welcome to reach out to me. If you have any deeper questions, you are welcome to reach out to Eric. Our contact information will also be in the HR in the email with the slides. Let's take another 2-3 minutes to open the room. If anybody has questions, then please raise your digital hand, and then I can call for you. And otherwise, we would say thank you so much for coming today, and look forward to our invitation to our next meeting after a little summer break. Very good. I see nobody frantically pressing on the question, raising hand button. That is also okay. Then, yeah, Eric, any final words?
Only one last comment, right? Which is development of AI technology is moving faster than corporate decision cycles, right? So I think this is just a topic that you really have to be proactive on, because the Chinese companies, the Chinese competitors really are moving hard on this with a lot of government support. So really, it's critical for corporates to figure out how to be effectively using AI in China.
Very good. All right, guys. Then that is it for today. Thank you all very much for joining. I hope you have a good rest of the Wednesday, and you'll be hearing from us via email soon. Thank you. Bye, guys.